Welcome back to another wrap up. Last month I read 8 books, which was really surprising for me because I was in a book slump for majority of the month. You guys watch my reading vlogs, you know, you've been there with me through it all. It was pretty bad. It was one of the worst ones that I've had, so it was not fun at all. But through it all, we still were able to read 8 different books, a couple of different genres. We had some fantasy, some thriller mysteries, some nonfiction. So let's just dive right in and talk about the books that I read in the month of June. First and foremost, we started the month off with a bang. It was This Book Will Bury Me by Ashley Winstead. This is a mystery thriller that was a new release, and I was actually really looking forward to it all year because this author, I've read another one of her books and I really enjoyed it. So when I knew she was coming out with a new thriller, immediately had to add it to my TBR, read it, and I was really impressed. I ended up rating it 4.5 stars because it was just super entertaining, very fast paced. It did exactly what you would hope a thriller mystery book would do. Now this book centers on our main character Jane, who goes through a very tragic moment in her life, and through that she kind of finds herself in this Reddit true crime style forum on the internet where she develops these relationships with people and friendships with basically strangers, but it's in a moment during a time where she really just needs to not be alone. I will say it very much touches on relationships that are very parasocial, and it just touches on like the true crime junkie podcast type of vibe. So if you're at all into that, and I think you would definitely like this book. From the beginning, it carries a very interesting plot and it's very immersive. Also, Jane's main driving motive for joining this sort of like band of sleuths is really valid, and I totally saw the justification of that. And it really kind of has like a found family sort of vibe and feel because it's kind of like a group of misfits. Also, if you know anything about the College, Idaho murders of I think 4 adults or teenagers a couple of years ago, then you would very much find this book interesting because it touches a lot on that sort of crime and it almost kind of recreates it. It's very inspired by it as well as the author's own personal experiences. I will say I feel like I kind of guessed like the big plot twist at the very end, and I'm not one for guessing plot twists. Like I will let the book immerse me and I'm not one to try to like out sleuth the author. So I was very surprised that I kind of guessed it. So I feel like that's why I rated it 4.5 stars as opposed to 5. And I guess it didn't really give me a 5-star feeling, but the book was over like 500 pages. So it was very long. And even then I read it in like 2 days. It is back at my library now because it was a borrowed book, but I would definitely recommend this book. It was a very good adventure. Next book that I read in June was Legendary by Stephanie Caraval. Was Legendary by Stephanie Garber. This is book 2 in the Caraval trilogy, and this one mostly follows Donatella. The first book follows her sister Scarlett, so this is Donatella's journey through and through. We do get another Caraval, which is really fun because I feel like Caraval itself, it's a festival, it's very magical, and it's honestly the main plot point and the main intriguing factor in this entire trilogy, so I'm really glad that they brought it back. With that being said, the characters in this story are so deep, very well developed. I love the sisterhood, but also like the secrets and the betrayals that happen in sister relationships, but I also really loved the romance. I feel like the first book was definitely great in the romance aspect, but that one, the world building is really what sucked me in, and this one was definitely the romance. It was just my perfect type of chemistry. I loved the flirty banter, the tension, the chase as well. These two characters, Donatella and Dante, are very sort of like playing with each other, but I feel like both know are interested in each other, and we follow that because it's a very complicated mess in terms of relationships in this book. There's also a really interesting plot regarding our main female character's mother and how she's trying to like rescue her. All in all, it is a fantasy series, so there is kind of a lot happening in this. Stephanie Garber's writing is just absolutely beautiful. She mentions glass stained chair bottoms. Wait, this is what she said: chairs with stained glass feet. So if you can picture that, like, I could not imagine that this is the type of world that this author was building. Absolutely loved it. Rated it 4 stars. I don't think I said that, but I really enjoyed it. It's another book that was kind of chunky, so I feel like it was interesting that I was already kind of in my book slump and I chose 2 pretty chunky books to like try to get me out of it, but these 2 books were just really good, and yet I didn't exit my book slump, which was a little sad. Honestly, I cannot wait for the 3rd and final book in this trilogy. I will be reading anything and everything else that Stephanie Garber writes because because I'm obsessed with her writing. She's quickly become one of my favorite authors. I just think her world building and the plot itself of her stories is very motivating. It's very intriguing, and as a reader, it's everything that I want in a book. Every couple pages, there's new information that is being learned. There's a lot of mini plot twists. So if you want a good fantasy series that's not super hard to follow, has a great romance and a beautiful setting, then I cannot recommend the Caraval trilogy enough. Next up, we read TheAnxious Generation, which is a nonfiction read, and I will say this book took me on a very, very interesting trip. Now, I didn't read it because I don't rate nonfiction books, but this one basically talks about how our childhood, or at least maybe 15, 20 years ago, was more of a child play-based childhood, and now it's definitely more of an online internet sort of childhood, and that has very detrimental effects to a child's developing brain. So I feel like we always hear that being talked about, like iPad kids and just the increased use of social media, but to see the data and the statistics and the actual real life stuff that's happening because of these changes in our childhood was really, really mind-blowing. I will say, if you've ever at all thought about that and how that could contribute to anxiety or just mental health, and I definitely would recommend this book. Again, I feel like I learned so much. I love the way that it was like written because it was broken down into little itty bitty pieces that were very digestible, and it was easy to follow. It didn't feel like a big textbook read. It felt more of almost like when you're reading a magazine and you have a subheading and you're reading this paragraph because of this, and then you're going to compare it to how boys develop. So it was just really interesting in the way that it was written. The actual information itself was very educational, and I absolutely recommend it. All in all, it's basically how social media has rewired our brains, and it has very drastic effects, which has led to a rising wave of higher rates of anxiety in our younger generation. So it is pretty sad, but I really like too that the author at the very end includes some very like concrete examples of how we can minimize these risks and what we can do instead. And they emphasize community, which I feel like is so important, and I feel like we just don't have enough of that, or at least not enough in comparison to how it was back in the days. I like specifically too how it talks about how these changes have directly affected how kids communicate, how they problem solve, and those are really, really vital things for a child to develop on their own, and without that and having a phone-based childhood, like they don't get those same skills. So I don't know, it was just really enlightening, and I would recommend it. The cover itself I feel like caught my attention immediately, and it was just great. Next up, we have another nonfiction read, and that was The Devil's Highway by Luis Alberto Urrea. Not rated nonfiction, but this one is a true story basically, or a true experience based on the Devil's Highway, which is a portion of land between the Mexican border and the desert of southern Arizona. So this follows a group of immigrants that basically underwent this really tragic journey to try to get to the United States of America. And it was a very sad book because it's a very true experience of how crossing the desert is extremely dangerous, but also very deathly. I mean, when you think crossing the desert, I know you come up with some things in your head, but this book was very, very specific in how the sun, stage by stage by stage, starts shutting your body down, and it was really horrific to read and almost like bone chilling because this is happening to real people. This actually follows a group of immigrants, which I think I mentioned, so it was like 20 people, and obviously they run into bad actors out in the desert, and the way these people take advantage of groups of immigrants, when at the end of the day these immigrants were just coming to America to try to find a better life for themselves and their families. It was just really, really sad, but I feel like it was a very important read, and I would recommend it to anybody wanting to read more about immigrant stories, wanting to read more about the dangers of leaving your country and the sacrifices that people make to try to find a better life. All in all, would definitely recommend this book. It was very sad, but it's not super long, so if you're just looking for something in this sort of genre, I would point you in this direction. We're flying through this wrap up. Now, the next book that I read was Problematic Summer Romance, a romance book. Yay, different genre. This was actually my book club book of the month, and I rated this 3 stars. This is Ali Hazelwood's newest release, and I was very much looking forward to this book the second it was announced because I'll read anything Ali Hazelwood writes, if I'm being honest. She's just great at writing good, fun romances, and honestly that was this. The only thing that's a bit different about this book than her typical romances is this was more of an age gap romance, and the age gap is 15 years, which I feel like while I was reading it I didn't really take that away from the book, but looking back I was like, wait, these people were in a relationship with a 15-year age difference, and they first meet when they are, I think, 15 and 30. No, actually, I don't even know at what ages they first met. But this is about Maya. I will say, if you haven't read Not in Love, I would say maybe check this book out, because the couple from this book, the guy, this is his sister's story, if that makes sense. The sister in this book, her name is Maya, and she's going to a wedding with Connor, that's the male main character, and they have a bit of a romance because they kind of met each other a long time ago and then kind of stopped talking. So we get more of a present and past timeline, which I love that in romances. Ali Hazelwood did her thing with injecting comedy, which loved that, but I feel like the whole time I was a little uncomfortable knowing that the age gap was so huge and vast, and they don't do a really good job of minimizing it. I feel like our male main character over and over and over again talks about how he's not comfortable with this and why he's not comfortable with it, and I get it, but if it was mentioned once or twice, fine, but it's over and over again that it keeps being repeated. And then Maya, the female main character, continuously just talks about how old Connor is, which kind of put me off because I'm like not trying to picture that in this romance. I will say it takes place in a villa in Italy, so it's super summer coded. If you're looking for a fun kind of easy summer romance, then I guess I would recommend this. Keep in mind that it's an age gap romance, because I feel like I haven't really read books like this in the past, and I don't know if I would in the future, just because it was just interesting. I will say though, I did like that Connor, our main male character, was very kind of rough around the edges but very sweet to Maya, so I love when our male main characters are like that. Also, there's a cheeky little deep end cameo, so if you haven't read that book, again, read it so you can catch it, because I actually really liked that. In the end, I feel like not much happened at all, and that's why I feel like I rated it 3 stars. Would recommend more for the vibes, not really because of the plot though. Oh, I think there's a bookmark in here. I'll take that. Let's jump in to book number 6 that I read in June. That book was none other than My Friends by Frederik, and you're gonna be really sad to know that I rated this 2 stars. Yeah, this was a 2-star read for me, and I think it just solidified that it's more his writing style that is just not for me. I will say I've read other Frederik books, love the Beartown series, and I just have one more book left in that trilogy that I'm going to finish and read because I do really like that series. Other than that, I don't think I'm going to read any more of his books. I did really want to read Anxious People before going into this one, and then reading this one just made me realize that we don't vibe. Like, his writing style is beautiful and it's very unique, but it's just not for me. So again, won't go into it, but I will say my only problems weren't just with the writing style. This book is about Louisa. Mostly we follow her, our female main character, and she is kind of a person who's had a really tough childhood. She's like a foster child, and she just turns 18, so now she's trying to kind of find her place in the world amongst a lot of chaos that she's only known, really. We find this guy who's an artist who painted this postcard that she found, and she loved it, and so she's really glad to have met this artist. But basically we go into a past and present timeline of the artist and what led to that postcard slash big art being drawn. I just could not really care less. I mean, I did really care about the characters and their stories. I feel like they were important, but the way the writing was made was just, it made for a really kind of dull story. I just don't know if I'm describing this correctly, because it just didn't really sit right with me. I felt like it felt really long. It took me probably 3 weeks to finish this book, and that's just really not like me. And I didn't want to DNF it because I did find the characters to be pretty intriguing, but just the way the writing style, it made it feel very slow. It is very much a coming of age story, so if you like those types of books, then I would recommend this. If you do like Frederik books, then for sure go into it. But if you're not one to like a book because the characters are interesting, but the actual story itself, you feel like you're gonna get the main part of the story much sooner than you really do. And I will say he does a lot of sort of like foreshadowing, or not really, because he's very blatant with it. He'll kind of tell you what's gonna happen with the characters, but then it takes however long this book is to actually get the real story out of him. And even then, I just felt like the anticipation was not worth the actual result of what happened. So yeah, the character depth is there, but it just didn't flow for me. I felt myself getting really distracted and I really just wanted to finish it just to finish it. But if you do like a dysfunctional group of friends and a coming of age story with a lot of emotional depth, then I would recommend it. But it just wasn't for me, and unfortunately probably won't be picking up another one of his books in the future. Next up, we have James by Percival Everett. This is the 7th book that I read in June. Ended up rating it 4.5 stars. And I will say, I believe the genre is historical fiction, even though technically this is a retelling of Huckleberry Finn, but from the slave's perspective. And I will just say I loved this book, ate it up in a day. It's not that long either, but it was just so fascinating. I loved the writing. I loved the main character. I feel like the author did a really good job of balancing the tough, emotional, sad story with a lot of humor and comedy at just the right points, and it made certain characters lovable and you felt like empathy towards them. With that being said though, there are a lot of tougher topics discussed, so I would definitely maybe check trigger warnings. But I really enjoyed this book. I had such a fun time. It was a great adventure. I cannot wait now to read Huckleberry Finn. At the beginning of this year, I made it a goal of mine to read 2 classics, and I've read Little Women, so I don't really know what other classic to pick up. And I think Huckleberry Finn would be a great idea now that I kind of have Jim's perspective. I will say the title, loved it. For the longest time I was like, what the heck is this book about? Who the heck is James? But I know who James is now, and I loved this book. I would recommend it, especially because it's so short and you will not get bored. There's something happening every few pages and it's just great. Loved the way the story was told. It's very gripping with very short chapters, which just keeps your attention. It's multi-layered, very thoughtful, but also sad. I feel like there's an unlimited amount of ways to describe this book, but I really liked the humor, which made everything a bit less sad and heavy. So definitely recommend. And then last but not least, I finished this literally on June 30th, last day of the month, Leather and Lark, another romance. This is a dark romance, book 2 in the Ruinous Love trilogy. So I read this is Leather and Lark. I read The Butcher and Blackbird last year. I have been wanting to get this off my TBR for the longest time because I do want to finish this trilogy, and honestly, really liked this book. I think I rated it 3.75 stars. Really enjoyed it. Was almost 4 stars. I would recommend it. I feel like looking back, I enjoyed it more than the first book, but the first book was a 4-star book for me. I think mostly because the first book kind of like broke the barrier of the outrageousness, and then this one I kind of knew already what to expect. But with that being said, we're following Lark and Lachlan, those are their names, and I really liked them. I bought the chemistry that they had going on. They're very interesting characters, and I loved their backstories as well. And I feel like they really were just down for each other and would have done anything for each other, including a marriage of convenience, which is the main trope in this book. So usually those tropes can be hit or miss with me. This one did it right, honestly. I felt the enemies sort of vibe at the beginning, and then the marriage of convenience comes into play, and then there's real feelings that are being developed by the end of it. I will say I did keep questioning if the romance felt real or not, or I don't know. I just kept double guessing and hesitating, but in the end I feel like if it's making you question that, I took it as a positive because I was like, wait, like no way, this is actually making me feel like their romance is real. So I don't know if that's just my way of looking at it, or if this specific book made it so that I looked at it in that specific way. If that makes any sense at all. It's such a fun little whirlwind, and I'm very excited to read the next book in this series. I've heard this one I think is the most like unliked one, and I really enjoyed it. I will say check trigger warnings. The trigger warnings page at the beginning is kind of long and outrageous because there are some crazy things that happen in this book, and I mean that's all just part of the fun of it. I think it's a very unique book. It's a dark romance about serial killers that'll just make it feel like a movie. Those are all the books that I read. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and stick with me to see what I read in July. That's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.